Hi, this is Rebecca from Prep Scholar. In this lesson, we're going to answer a question we hear a lot. How do I get a 120 on the TOEFL? The first thing to emphasize is that you probably don't need a 120 on the TOEFL. Most students need a TOEFL score for university admissions, and the requirement for admission is usually no higher than 100. Occasionally, some schools will require a TOEFL 105 or a TOEFL 110 for admission, but we've never seen a requirement of 120. The second thing is that it is really hard to get a 120 on the TOEFL. In fact, a lot of native speakers don't get a 120 when they take the TOEFL. That's because the TOEFL is a long and complicated test, and it is natural to make a few mistakes, even if you're very good at English. Still, it's good to set high goals for yourself, and if you want to get a 120 on the TOEFL, we're going to explain how to do it. First, let's talk about TOEFL scoring. There are 4 sections on the TOEFL: reading, listening, speaking, and writing. And you can get a maximum score of 30 on each one of them. So, to get a score of 120 on the TOEFL, you need to get a score of 30 on every one of those sections. Well, how do you do that? Let's begin by talking about the reading section. The maximum score on the reading section is 30, but there will be more than 30 questions. In fact, there will typically be at least 36. All of these questions will be worth at least 1 point, and some will be worth more than 1 point. The sum of all the points for all your questions will be your raw score. For a TOEFL reading section with 36 questions, for example, this might be 45 raw points. Now, here is the important question. Do you need to get every question correct to get a 30 on the TOEFL reading section? Not necessarily. Since there are more than 30 raw points, it is possible that you lose 1 point and your scaled score, that is, the score you get when your score is converted to the 30-point scale, is still a perfect 30. So, you might be able to get 1 question wrong on reading and still get a 30, and still have a chance to get a 120 on your TOEFL. But this is a pretty minor exception. Basically, if you are aiming to get a 120 on your TOEFL, you should be aiming to get every single question on the reading section correct. And what about listening? The scoring of the listening section is very similar. There will be at least 34 questions on the listening section, and some of them are worth more than 1 point. So, it is sometimes possible to get 1 listening question wrong and still get a 30 on listening. But, again, don't depend too much on that exception. If you're aiming to get a 120 on the TOEFL, you should be aiming to get every single listening question right. Now, let's talk about speaking and writing. These are not multiple choice questions, so it's difficult to be as precise about grading. But ETS, the company that makes the TOEFL, releases their grading guidelines for each of these sections, and we can use them to figure out what is required for a perfect score on these sections. Let's begin with speaking. There are 2 kinds of speaking questions: independent, the first 2 questions on the speaking section, and integrated, the last 4 questions. Each question is graded on a scale from 0 to 4. To get a 30 on the speaking section, you need to get a 4 on each speaking question. What do you have to do this? Here is what ETS says about responses that get a score of 4. These guidelines are for independent questions, but the guidelines for integrated are similar. The response fulfills the demands of the task, with at most minor lapses in completeness. It is highly intelligible and exhibits sustained, coherent discourse. A response at this level is characterized by all of the following. They then list 3 criteria. First, delivery. Generally well-paced flow, fluid expression. Speech is clear. It may include minor lapses or minor difficulties with pronunciation or intonation patterns, which do not affect overall intelligibility. Next, language use. The response demonstrates effective use of grammar and vocabulary. It exhibits a fairly high degree of automaticity with good control of basic and complex structures as appropriate. Some minor or systematic errors are noticeable but do not obscure meaning. Finally, topic development. Response is sustained and sufficient to the task. It is generally well developed and coherent. Relationships between ideas are clear, or clear progression of ideas. Remember, a response that gets a score of 4 needs to do all of those things. So, how do you get a 30 on TOEFL speaking? You give 6 answers in a row that all meet those standards. That's not easy to do, especially under the conditions of the TOEFL test. But it's possible. Test yourself. Try to answer 6 TOEFL questions in a row. Our speaking practice tests are a great way to do this. Record yourself. Be honest about what you've done well and not so well. Then, see if your answers all show this kind of fluid delivery, good grammar and vocabulary, and sustained development of ideas. If they do, you might be able to get a 30 on the TOEFL speaking section. And finally, writing. There are only 2 questions on writing: the integrated task and the independent task, and each of them is graded on a scale from 0 to 5. To get a 30 on writing, you need to get a 5 on each task. How do you do that? Again, we can look at ETS's own guidelines. Here is what they say about an integrated essay that gets a score of 5. A response at this level successfully selects the important information from the lecture and coherently and accurately presents this information in relation to the relevant information presented in the reading. The response is well organized, and occasional language errors that are present do not result in inaccurate or imprecise presentation of content or connections. And here is what they say about an independent essay that gets a score of 5. An essay at this level largely accomplishes all of the following: effectively addresses the topic and task, is well organized and well developed, using clearly appropriate explanations, exemplifications, and/or details, displays unity, progression, and coherence, displays consistent facility in the use of language, demonstrating syntactic variety, appropriate word choice, and idiomaticity, although it may have minor lexical or grammatical errors. To get a 30 on writing, you'll need to write 2 English essays that meet those standards. Can you do this? Test yourself. Take 50 minutes to write an integrated and an independent essay. Our writing practice test is a great way to do this. Then, see if your essays meet these standards. Be honest. If they do, you might be ready to get a 30 on the TOEFL writing section. All right, let's review. What does it take to get a 120 on the TOEFL? First, answer every reading question correctly, or almost every question. Answer every listening question correctly, or almost every question. Give high-level responses to all 6 speaking questions. And write a high-level essay for both of the 2 writing questions. Oh, that's a lot! But if you're confident in your English, it's a reachable goal. Whatever score you're aiming for, we recommend our complete TOEFL course. It's designed to increase your score on all 4 sections of the test. So, whether you're trying to get a perfect score or trying to get the score you need for admission to your dream school, Prep Scholar TOEFL is made for you. Try it now at TOEFL.PrepScholar.com. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe and see you at Prep Scholar.